There used to be a family amongst us who had a blood red corn. And I understand they still have it, but they're stingy with it. They won't let it go. It's all right, that's theirs. That belongs to them. But a lot of us, we depend now on this common mixed colored corn. White, yellow, black, whatever. And that's what we have to do to continue. Adaptation, we call it. If we didn't adapt, you, I, whoever would be gone. My nephew and a few of our associates had become acquainted with some people from New York. We've started trading seed. And the intent is to save a portion of that seed and try and grow some now and crossbreed it with our existing seed to re-strengthen a stock, or, and we had tobacco. We grow tobacco for sacred doings, and they're the biggest babies there are. They're more possessive than the possessive girlfriend or whatever, but they require time. They're worse than children, and you gotta baby them. You gotta be with them. You gotta talk with them. They're social plants. They don't have that interaction. Their leaves won't come out as big. They're very particular on who touches and grows those. Young ladies aren't permitted to work with them. It's only the elders and people who aren't under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and so they're that sensitive. We garden, and I'm glad that they're doing that for their communities. Well, when I say we garden, I'm talking we garden. It's nothing like that. That's like a flower box. In our family, it's a large garden, and makes that one look like playtime. But the attempt to show the young people, it's good, very good. And I'll say this. Something that small is easily taken care of, easily. But something from here to the pine trees away, that way, it's a lot of walking, strooping, crawling, and pulling, and then you wish you had a little bitty garden like that. So. And you often have to convince yourself, like, oh, we gotta do this. It has to be done. And who's gonna do it if you don't do it? So, like that. And it's a hope that that community will sit there and say, why don't we do something that big? There's enough of us where, like that. And I wish communities would say, hey, give us a quarter acre so we can plant. That'd be fantastic. Squash, corn, beans. But right now, the little gardens are fine until that need for it grows into those individuals. And maybe that's a fine way to grab your young people from letting them go astray too far and reach back and say, hey, help us with this, take part in this, or even with adults who are attempting to straighten out their lives and say, well, yeah, I'll occupy my time doing this, rather than trying to figure out how to beat the system or think they're beating the system. Sweet dream. Perfect soil. Anything that we have now, we have very few farmlands on our sides of the river which are not suitable for the growing that we need. Presently, my nephews, we go on lease lands for a season. We have somebody plant for us. But as far as the cultivating and caretaking, we do that. Here, this is a sweet site. As Muscadet is, but that's 99 miles away. We have a few farms to the north on this side of the Black River, black earth, not sand. So, if you ever looked at the little bitty gardens at Blue Wing or Sand Pillow, sand. These people bring in soil. So, yeah. You can't farm in sand unless you're doing potatoes, so, yeah.
Okay. So the soil up here is rich?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And it was within my jobs, I guess, the personal aspects of also, as I used to work at Heritage Preservation. And we still do, we still plant cornfields of our own native corn species for tribal members to use. And we have spells where we don't get any. And you go back in and you look and you see it's either too dry or it's just too wet. And that seems to be increasing more and more. We get very, very few successful harvests off of the big cornfields that we plant, where we used to be able to just put the seed out and they would just grow. They would go, and the weather would never perfect, but it would be enough for them to grow and you get a successful harvest. And we're seeing lesser and lesser yields on those type of plants. And we find that it's not the seeds themselves. We'll take the seeds, and where if you take care of them individually in smaller plots, they come up just fine. But when you put them out again in these big fields and kind of just let nature take care of it and go, they're not coming up. And again, it's not the soil, it's not the seeds, a lot of it has to do with the weather, and we're seeing these changing weather patterns. So when I was in Heritage Preservation, we started taking to creating smaller plots where we could provide a little bit more care and a little bit more maintenance so that we could up the yield. I'm very much an amateur. I would say we're very much amateur foragers. We have our mentors and the people that we that are go-to people, of course, our books, but we do have individuals very knowledgeable that we go and speak with and talk to and learn different things from. And in that instance, because it's new to me, I think my wife would be able to give a lot more insight into it. But in some of the individuals that we talk with, like I said, we're amateurs. We go out and harvest here and there, get a few things, and it's a fun pastime for us. But for one individual I'm thinking of in particular, he does this all the time. This is how he feeds himself and his family. And he has provided us information. And just like in this last year, going and speaking with him on the classes, the berries, the fruiting plants that didn't fruit this year because of some very odd weather patterns that took place in the spring. And again, coming from a guy who spent the better part of his life living in the woods, watching this, he's in tune, he knows when things come into season. For him to come to say, these are really strange weather patterns. I've not seen it like this before, and this has been going on for the last couple of years. And he would attribute that. He knows there's climate change, there is a change occurring. But that really makes us sit up and take notice.
We did look at a long-term long-term data on how actual temperature and precipitation has changed over the last 60 years or so. We used a lot of that information to better understand how changes in temperature and precip were impacting corn and soybean yield trends over the last 30 or 40 years. Overall, the trends that we found across the state of Wisconsin for temperature was that the most significant warming trends were occurring during winter and springtime and at nighttime, and that there are large portions of the state that have seen trends towards a very large decrease in the frequency of very cold nights or below zero. So overall, while we've seen quite a bit of warming, most of it is focused during the wintertime and during nighttime. We generally saw that about 30% of the year-to-year variation in yields were contributed to those trends in climate on a county-by-county basis, which is a pretty large, I guess, percentage of what you would expect to see. Those trends have also contributed to a trend towards earlier springtime planting of corn in particular, to the point that we plant corn about 10 days earlier now than we did about 40 years ago. And we know that for every extra day of earlier planting, that usually equals about an increase of 1 to 3 bushels per acre in corn yield at the end of the season. So it's been a pretty significant contribution, not only here in Wisconsin, but across the Midwest in yield trends since the 1970s. Looking forward, as temperature patterns change and precipitation patterns change, Wisconsin happens to lie in a climate regime that has a very significant gradient in terms of the types of hybrids for corn that we can plant from the south to north. So we're not like other southern corn belt states like Iowa and Illinois, where they generally plant the latest maturing crop types or hybrids, longest season varieties. We can go from a long season variety in the south all the way to a very, very short season variety up in the north. And that span creates quite a large gradient in the yield that we get from those crops. So it's a little bit uncertain, but you know, we could turn out to be more like a state like Iowa or Illinois in 50 years when it comes to a more consistent array of hybrids that are planted. And it's important just to keep track of the changes as they go along. Well, they're basically always trying to take advantage of the long growing season. So they generally just have a longer frost-free period. They generally don't have to deal with a lot of what we would call late spring frost that could damage crops after they've come out of the ground, which is something we do have to be concerned about here in Wisconsin. It really comes down to planting hybrids and genotypes that are best suited for that warmer climate, so you don't get into a situation where you're planting shorter season varieties that aren't taking advantage of the length of the growing season. So another potential problem is having more pests over winter that generally might be relegated further south where they're basically able to survive winters. Those might gradually shift northward and migrate as our winters become warmer. So that could create another management issue for farmers and growers in the region that they don't have to deal with right now. I mean, they do have to deal with pests, but not necessarily all the ones that could be coming into the region. I guess some examples would be soybean aphid, which actually was first discovered in Wisconsin around the year 2000 or 2001. Since then, farmers have come up with ways to manage that pest by knowing a threshold at which they need to spray and act on. Things like European corn borer. I'm not going to remember all the names of them, but some of these could be found as far south as the Gulf Coast. And you know, I don't know if those would eventually migrate all the way up here or not, but things that are found in Missouri, southern Illinois, Kentucky area, southern Iowa are definitely fair game in the next few decades. The weed problem could be pretty significant because weeds generally react just like any other plant in terms of how their phenology or their biological stages of growth could change. If we see warming in springtime, farmers may have to adjust the way they go about and spray before they have emergence taking place, or even before they have things planted in the ground. So it's a really big problem because the other issue is that with a variety of weeds that are found in the seed bank and the soils, there are different weeds that come up at different times of the year, and it's already a management mess. Changes in climate will only create more chaos, I guess, to that management problem. And generally a lot of the crop types too are C3 crops, which means they will react more strongly to increases in atmospheric CO2. Corn, being a C4 plant, isn't going to respond as much to increases in CO2, so there might be a competitive edge given to weeds in the future, unfortunately, as atmospheric CO2 goes up also. So I think probably all starts with data collection on the farm and keeping good records. I mean, large-scale operators already do this. They know what hybrids they're planting, they know when they planted them, when they harvested them. They keep all that type of information. But a part-time farmer or someone who's maybe not as technologically advanced or isn't able to afford those types of electronic management tools, handwritten records kept, those will be very valuable, moving forward, to try to piece together, like, okay, this did well this year, it didn't do well this year. That person may not have the expertise necessarily to piece those pieces of information together, but surely we have expertise at the university that can help. And we're already tracking a lot of these things, temperature trends and precipitation patterns and trends in planting and harvesting of different crops, as well as pests, I guess, too, and when they show up. For most of our traditional crops, it's really understanding how climate has changed in a way to affect your growing season length, as well as the number of growing degree days that you have available in a season. You want to make sure that you're planting the hybrid that's best suited for your region based on the recent weather and climate, and that might mean just the last 5 or 10 years rather than the last 30 or 40. And I think crop consultants and seed companies are kind of on top of these things already and making sure that people get what they're supposed to have. The second thing would be adjusting planting dates to the point where you're not planting so early that you end up with plant emergence and then a killing frost, which is generally what happened in 2012 around here with the 80-degree weather we had in March. Things went into full bloom, and then we had killing freezes after that. So we're kind of in a tough spot. There will always be a tendency of people wanting to get things in the ground early, but there's a risk that's associated with that.
Growing up as a gardener, I was always observing plants and trying to keep an eye to when the first frost was going to be, for example. And here we are, I'm talking to you today on October 19th, and we have yet to have a significant frost up here. Now if you look at the date that the USDA puts out, the first frost could be expected anytime between the beginning of September and mid-October. So at this point, we're past mid-October, and we have yet to have a significant frost. We have had one frost. It was not a killing frost. And as a gardener, as much as I like to see that, it's a little disconcerting to know that that trend is continuing. This isn't new. It's definitely part of a greater trend. So I've been a maple sugar producer for about 12 years, just on a small home scale, and noticed that every year things seem to be very different from historically how it was here. We've got the maple sugar moon in the Ojibwe calendar, and that doesn't necessarily always fall on when maple syrup is happening, and it's interesting to see how that has changed over the historical period when the climate was more or less stable in this region. So yeah, it's definitely a cause for concern, and I think that we just need to be adaptable and you know, be taking extra care, really looking at our role in keeping our forests healthy, and really looking at the farm as an ecosystem so that we can keep our soils healthy, keep ourselves healthy, and doing that by you know, building resilience into the farm ecosystem. So instead of systems that are solely reliant on fossil fuel, they might be cheap and easy right now, but they won't be for very long. And they don't build strength and resilience into the system. In fact, they're very vulnerable. Yeah, I've seen a number of changes, and I think we need to follow suit and make changes ourselves. You know, right here we have really thick clay soils, and people say, well, that's a problem, that's a shame. Well, how can we turn that problem into a solution? Well, the clay holds the water really well. With an uncertain climate, you know, the clay soil in a way is an adaptation to climate that we don't have to worry about. We're lucky that we have clay soils here. Now we just need to add organic matter, and that's not hard. We need animals, we need to be growing plants, and you know, using chop and drop, you can grow plants just for the purpose of building organic matter. We have started growing a lot more cover crops in the farm this year. So thinking 2 steps down the line, you know, not just waiting until the spring of, oh, we got to spread manure to put soil organic matter, or the fall spreading manure, but really thinking years ahead, and recognizing that this is a slow approach, but it's a more it's an approach that is building integrity and building resilience.